Yeah. So essentially, what is ESG? In some simple terms, it is the environment, social, and governance consideration. But what is important is that all stakeholders must put a lot of emphasis on this, and there is an overarching greater awareness about these agendas, and investors and all stakeholders, whether it is customers, whether it is suppliers, whether the government, regulators, anyone, they've become more mindful of these. And it's important to sort of bring in, it is important to sort of bring in, it is very important to sort of bring in the strategies in place, because if organizations and individuals and stakeholders are not ready, this may lead to certain adverse impacts as well. So while navigating risks, it is very important that ESG frameworks are put in place. Any strategy that is developed, implemented, has an ESG overarching framework. There is decisions need to be looked at from the ESG perspective, whether these are project decisions, whether these are financial decisions, whether these are organization sort of strategy related, going into a different geography, going into different kind of projects. So all of these are very, very important. So what we will be talking about is why it is important for the boards to sort of lead this agenda, build the capacity, and also for the senior leadership of organization. I mentioned about the risks. What we'll do is we will talk a little bit about what the risks are, and that's on the next slide. Yes. So this data that you see is coming from World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report, and so if you look at there are two categories in which the risks are put. One is the next 2 years, which is somewhat near term, and then in the next 10 years, which is a long-term view. So all the risks highlighted in green, these are environmental risks. The ones that are in yellow, these are geopolitical, and the red ones are societal. So just to give you a sense of that, the natural disasters and failure to mitigate climate change, failure to create adaptation technologies, strategies, all of these are really at the heart of planning. And if these are not addressed, businesses, organizations, countries, regions will become extremely vulnerable, because a lot of what is being consumed by organizations, by individuals, is coming from our ecosystem. And this can really lead to, at times, supply chain disruptions, not having the raw materials available, not having people to sort of make it to sort of work, etc. So from smaller to bigger, the risks are absolutely immense. So just to sort of mention another number, which is quite alarming, that about 2 billion people today live in fragile and conflict-affected areas. And the climate change impact on this population even augments the situation. However, the good thing is that while a lot of these risks exist, there is globally a very big commitment ecosystem now in place. Countries, global leaders, organizations, business leaders, they have committed to this. We all talk a lot about under the Paris Climate Agreement that we need to sort of maintain the temperature increase by not 1.5 degrees Celsius. So almost all conscious stakeholders, they are committed to this. There were a lot of pledges, commitments, and actions that were committed in COP27. and leading up to COP28, which in my view will be a COP of action. So there will be a lot of actions that we will see, which will be demonstrated, and hence organizations that are committed to that or who wish to sort of commit, and in fact that is the right thing to do, they need to lay down their actions and have their plans ready. Naira, could we please move to the next? I mentioned very briefly that not addressing the climate challenges can have huge amount of financial as well as all kind of adverse impacts. So what this slide really shows, the numbers right in front of your screen, are the cost of climate disasters in 2022. These were hurricanes, these were floods, these were storms, and these were droughts in all parts of the world, from South Asia all the way to Europe, to China, Latin America. So the entire planet is under a real threat. And so these are the kind of numbers that are shown. So in Cuba, the aftermath of hurricane sort of led to a cost of about $100 billion. In Pakistan, the flood caused a damage of $5.6 billion, but that is just the damage. The reconstruction runs into tens of billions of dollars. A shortage of water, and obviously because of that drought, and that also leads to food security. So companies that are in the food business, and in any case, the world's population needs to be fed. So food security is becoming a challenge as well. So just to sort of show you that what is the scale it is, and these are not, this is not just a good, just to sort of, organizations are not committing to this because it's something good to do, or the ethical or the right thing or the morally appropriate thing, but there is a huge financial loss if organizations do not commit to this. And again, coming back to that, all stakeholders within organizations have a huge responsibility when they are creating and implementing these ESG roadmaps. Could we please move on to the next? So in Europe, there's a new directive which is called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and there are obviously a lot of other frameworks that are out there. So companies are being taxed. There is carbon tax. There are other regulations and frameworks that are put in place so that the climate disaster can be mitigated, and companies are organizations, whether these are manufacturing companies, whether they're in the supply side, or whether services, or whether any sector, so to say, from generating materials to goods to services, it is very important that ESG considerations are at the heart of what businesses do. Highlighting here just high level, what are the kind of penalties that organizations had to pay. So if some of you may recall, BP's US Deepwater Horizon event that took place, and as an outcome of that, the company had to pay about north of $53 billion in fines. Volkswagen in 2015 had to pay about penalties of about 27 million euros for 27 billion euros penalties for its emissions in its diesel vehicles. And of course, there are. So when we're talking about ESG, it is not just limited to climate, it is about governance as well. So the governance issues also kind of play a very, very important role. So why it's important for the boards? The boards are right at the top of the organizations. They have the fiduciary responsibility and the buck sort of stops at them, that they are the one who have visibility, they are the one who have oversight over the management and over the plans of the organization. So hence it is very important for the boards to become more cognizant and of course build their own capacity and be ready to not only devise targets, but once the strategy is in place, be in a position to do and monitoring and assessment, and also then based from the outcome of those, plan ahead. Sure. Yeah. Could you please move on to the next? Yeah. So while there is, it is very important to understand that, of course, there is a cost of not bringing in ESG in organizational strategies. It's very important from a lot of other considerations perspective as well. Stakeholders, whether it is employers, whether it is customers, whether it is employees, whether it is suppliers, whether it is buyers, everybody is becoming more and more conscious that they would like to do business with organizations, or they would like to work with organizations that are more ESG compliant. So one of the stakeholders, of course, is Generation Z. So when the Generation Z, the millennials, and of course the younger generation coming in the workforce, what do they like to look at? They not only want to sort of work with organizations who are just going to be growth oriented for them, or who probably are taking care of them economically and financially. There's now a greater consideration that they want to align themselves and their career paths where it is the right thing. They are working in an environment where things are done in the right manner. There's no adverse impact on any stakeholder, and of course, planet being one of them. Now, talking from the perspective of the investors, the investor community has become more and more cognizant of the fact that that wherever their money is being put, it should be in a place which is more responsible, and any businesses that investors align themselves with, those do not have any adverse contribution to the climate or any other agenda. So businesses that are high carbon emitting those do not have good social and ethical practices, investors are taking the money slowly and gradually from them. So according to the international agency, the net zero targets have been adopted by hundreds of corporates, hundreds of organizations all over the world, and the organization leaders, the chief executive officers, they now understand that in order for organizations' growth, it is very important that they take care of all the social governance and environmental issues. Yeah. Could we please move on to the next? Yes, please. Thank you. I mentioned about investors. So this is a result from an EY survey, which shows that this is a very recent one from a year ago, which shows that of 80% of the respondents who responded to this survey, this was done by EY Global. They say that investors and ESG was an important factor for their investment decisions. In the senior executive category, 89% of them, they understand and they indicated that for them to take action, ESG data is absolutely essential. When it comes to employees, 86% of employees preferred and would wanted to work for companies that cared about the issues. And what I mentioned about the Gen Z, a large part of the global population. When we look at the global population north of 7 billion, one needs to sort of look at that, where we are heading, what are the demographic dynamics, and where the bigger markets are in terms of the populations that could be impacted by climate change, or the population who will now be coming in the next decades in the workforce. The customers, I mentioned about customers as well, they are becoming extremely careful and conscious. They would like to spend their dollars, and even perhaps at times, if they have the affordability, to pay extra price, a premium on the price for products, goods, and services where they know they have the visibility, and they understand that their choice of making that purchase or making that transaction is actually having a positive impact on the climate and on the planet. So it's just the data is more and more self-evident, and hence even if we talk a lot about this, I think there's still more awareness that needs to be created. Mention about Paris Climate Agreement, and I think if we go by working at the same pace as we are not going to make to the targets that have been adopted, whether it is under the Paris Climate Agreement or the net zero targets that countries and companies and organizations have given to themselves. Could you please move on to the next? Yes. So again, so why ESG is important for the boards? A survey of the Fortune 500 companies, investors attach greater importance to ESG. So this is 90% of the investors do. And 86% investors believe that strong ESG program or performance would have a significant and direct impact on how analysts would rate and put their company's value. So when people are making investment decisions, the analysts are supporting them, and of course using the ESG lens. So it's extremely important. And investors are now taking their dollars from where traditionally it was not seen to be not a challenge to invest, but now it is. So they are moving their investments to other places, other options where they are sure that their investments are ESG compliant. And 86% of the investors are more likely to hold on to the investments which have strong ESG performance. Yeah. Can we move on to the next, please? So this is also this is a data that's coming from BlackRock. So in 2020, BlackRock publicly announced that ESG issues will be guiding their investment decisions. So whether it is BlackRock, whether it's Goldman Sachs, whether it is the biggest of the funds all over the world, they realized and they are now committing their capital to more ESG compliant entities and investments all over the world because of all the considerations that I mentioned earlier. So just to talk about a few numbers, in COP26, if some of you may recall that under the Glasgow Financial Alliance, 130 trillion capital was committed to the agenda of climate. And of course, there are other considerations that come in as well. So this capital is also part of the initiatives that many of these fund managers are also undertaking. So it just makes sense to sort of follow where the capital is sort of the conscious capital is going, because this is backed by a lot of data and the right kind of rationales. Yeah. Could we move on to the next, please? Thank you. I think the more we talk about these issues, it's still very, very important. So again, coming from a BlackRock survey, 66% of 271 of the institutional clients poll that ESG standards and ESG considerations are very important for their investment strategy. So the non-ESG compliant investments are going to be less and less, and they'll be moving more towards impact as well as investing. Yeah. Could we move on to the next, please? So there are lots of frameworks out there, and of course, we cannot talk about all the frameworks, but just to sort of give you an idea, a sense of that the capital markets are tracking ESG performance, whether it is Dow Jones, whether it is S&P indices, whether it is FTSE, any of these, and that of course reflects in the share price of listed companies. And also there are lots of indices that have committed to ESG compliance. So the stock exchanges, the capital markets all over the world are now adopting frameworks. A lot of them, they did this initially on volunteer basis, but now they are bringing in the requirement for integrated reporting as well. Even if it is not a compliance issue, it is a good thing to do because organizations will, of course, benefit. So if there are two parallel investments options, so the one that is more compliant and the one that is more transparent and one that provides more visibility and how organizations are managing their ESG issues, how they're managing the supply chains, how green the supply chains are, how less carbon emitting the supply chains are, and their operations, the more premium they will get in terms of not only getting the business, but in terms of the organization value, the valuations as well. Could we move on to the next, please? So talking about best practices for what should the boards do? So the boards have an oversight and they on sort of the entirety of organization. So whether it is bringing in their ESG frameworks, whether it is bringing in conscious investors, the climate capital, or attracting investors through tools like green bonds and other sort of climate friendly bonds, blue bonds, etc. And if they have, if they implement frameworks of socially responsible investing, because this is what investors are really looking for. So these are some of the things that boards must sort of look at when they are devising their organizational plans. The number that I mentioned about 130 trillion dollars of money that is out there available, which includes public and private capital. A big chunk of that is private capital. So it's important that that opportunity must also be captured. So while ESG roadmap creation is the right thing to do, there is huge amounts of business upside there as well. Yeah. Could we move on to the next? Yes. So since we are gathered here in the MENA region, it's very important that we sort of talk a bit about the impacts and the opportunities from the climate and the ESG perspective in the region. So the next slide, please. So if we do not do anything, what are the challenges ahead? So in the MENA region, there are 55 million people that have food insecurity issues. There are pockets where there is fragility, there are conflicts, and these regions are more and more climate impacted. Water scarcity, public health and labor conditions, and climate issues, of course, cause migration as well. So while there are all throughout the region, some regions may not be impacted. If in an overall area, if say in the entire region, if there are pockets which are more vulnerable, the larger region can also have an impact of that. So it's important to sort of be mindful of that and sort of address those issues well ahead. The region has committed really to work towards energy transition. And in my personal opinion, I believe the region is ideally placed to lead actually energy transition, even though being one of the biggest hydrocarbon producer, because of having the right kind of sort of ingredients there, whether it is land, whether it is sun, whether it is water. So it's important that that opportunity needs to be captured. The challenges are there, but on the flip side, there are definitely opportunities. Could we move on to the next, please? Yes. So lots of announcements were made in COP26, COP27, and a lot of these in the energy transition space. When we look at sort of the climate flows, climate capital or the climate finance flows coming into the region does not get a huge chunk of this finance. So overall, in sort of the Middle East and North Africa region, as per Climate Policy Initiative report, only receive about $16 billion of climate finance, which is quite low in my opinion, and the potential is absolutely huge. So the commitments are there. The global capital commitments are there. The availability of funding is there. I believe it is the right time that the region can sort of use this opportunity and plan ahead for this. Could you please move on to the next? The opportunities are immense. The opportunities lie in all these different areas, whether it is in the area of energy transition, whether it is economic diversification, whether it is leveraging the young population, whether it is bringing all of the climate consideration, ESG consideration in the education space as well. Civic engagement is a very important way to engage people. And then, of course, leveraging on the technology that is out there, that is available, and build on those technologies to build a green and resilient and inclusive lead towards inclusive development. Next, please. Yeah. So the dots here are, I don't want you to get too confused about this. I'll just highlight that the blue ones are highlighting opportunities in the food and water security areas. The green one are opportunities in the energy transition and low carbon mobility. The yellow one is in the climate and smart cities, resilient economies, and the fourth one is around, the fourth one and the red is showing the sustainable finance and climate action opportunities. So you can see that from all the way to North Africa, etc., and many others in the region, there are lots of opportunities that are highlighted. So these are just four key low carbon opportunities areas, but that doesn't cover the whole. And in the next slide, we'll discuss a little bit about the net zero targets that the countries have made in the region. So a majority of the countries have committed to the net zero targets starting from 2030, 2050, and going to 2060. And a bulk of that is in the renewable energy and clean energy area. So globally, the energy is the highest emitting, one of the highest emitting sectors, and then followed by mobility. From Saudi Arabia to UAE, of course, and all the other countries all throughout the region in the Middle East and North Africa, they have committed to the net zero target, and also investing a huge amount of sums and their time and energies towards energy transition as well. Yeah. Could we move on to the next, please? Okay, can we move on to the next, please? Yeah. So again, why extremely important that looking at all the trends, so from the investors' perspective, from when the analysts are sort of analyzing companies, and from all the stakeholders, whether it is people who are working for organizations or people who have any kind of dealing with business, suppliers, buyers, the finance and capital providers, everybody has become more and more conscious. Organizations need to have climate change strategy, ESG strategies. They need to be transparent in their disclosure. And it's very important to look at from the long-term perspective and not just having a short-term view. And obviously, there are multiples and hundreds of organizations that have lasted over centuries globally. And why certain companies, certain organizations, they last over hundreds of years is because they have a certain set of values. They have a certain ethos. And for now, going forward, the ethos that will really lead and that will really result into longevity is doing the right thing from the climate and from the ESG perspective as well. And at the same time, it's all about not just doing the right thing, but benefiting from it as well. So I really do see the future really, really bright. And I think it's important that we harness the opportunity and build up capacities and strategies to be ready. So COP28 is just one of the milestones. I'm sure there are many, many others that will come, but this is the time to get ready. Could we move on to the next, please? So what is that businesses should do? They should measure and reduce their carbon footprint. They must invest in products, technology, innovation, which are leading to climate preservation. We all understand that at times businesses can also have a huge leverage when dealing with stakeholders like regulators and governments. They can definitely play their voice and use their conscious voice for pro-climate legislation. And talking about pro-climate legislation, different regions, different countries will do it as per their own readiness. It will start, and it should start, with volunteer acceptance, volunteer sort of adopting these considerations on volunteer basis, and then of course bringing in compliance later as well. Some countries may not be absolutely ready probably in the next 12 months for carbon pricing, whereas some countries are there and they can do that. Some of the other considerations are, of course, diversity and inclusivity. That's also extremely, extremely important. The map here, this is like a heat map, which is showing that some of the issues that are very, very important, or some that are sort of high on agenda on the businesses internal risk assessment map. Social and environmental considerations, climate change, and emissions and energy management. And of course, then there are plenty of others as well, doing the right kind of implementation of whatever actions that they do, whether it is labor management, whether it is issues like diversity and inclusion, using of a conscious use of resources, and all of that. Could we move on to the next, please? So adopting ESG frameworks and strategies are really going to give a competitive advantage and will manage the risks. Whether these are physical risks, whether these are risks of sort of being extinct, not investing in technology or not getting the right kind of investment. So overall, it is about risk reduction. It is about building trust with stakeholders. It is about creating more inclusive environment. It is about growth and opportunity. It is about attracting the right kind of talent. It is about organizational resilience. So all in all, it just makes sense. It is for the growth. It is for the future, and it is the right thing to do. Could we move on to the next, please? So these are some of the initiatives which are sort of some of the commitments done by the globally known organizations. So let's start with Apple, because a lot of people are Apple users. So Apple has committed to 100% use of renewable energy. And that includes all through the supply chain, to the factories that manufacture Apple products, to the retail outlets which sell, and where they're procuring their materials from. IKEA manufactures its product using sustainable materials. They have committed to lessening the waste. Companies like Intel, which uses, of course, a lot of materials, metals, minerals, etc., all of that. They have committed that they will be doing recycling. They will recycle 75% of the total waste. Google has committed to using 50% less energy. Unilever, another global conglomerate, have presence all over the world. They have planned that by 2030, they will reduce their carbon emissions by half, and they encourage, of course, sustainable growth. Estee Lauder has committed zero waste to landfills. There are lots of conscious business initiatives, networks, and commitments that are out there. And businesses and organizations can really choose as to what really works for them. Under the UN Global Compact, there are frameworks available, and of course we'll be talking about much more about those frameworks in our workshops, in our sort of future webinars, etc. What is right for certain organizations in terms of sort of going towards renewable energy? There are frameworks, there are commitments, there are coalitions, business coalitions out there as well. So there is a lot of support that businesses and organizations can get. We encourage this discussion a lot, and that is why we are here to support you. And something that we as a whole group, we are very passionate about these issues, because we believe that this is the right thing to do. It is very important for our future generations. It is important to be ahead of all the developments and doing the right thing. And now is the most opportune time to bring in ESG strategies and ESG roadmaps. Yeah. So I believe we have, maybe we do have a last slide, or maybe we can just move on and open for Q&A. Yeah. Naira, could we move on to the next? Yeah. So yeah. For the discussion that we are having now and what we will be having in the next coming months, starting with our course in the month of May, this will develop the knowledge and skill set and tools to build for the ESG roadmap. And we are, of course, we will be focusing on the UAE and the Middle East as well, with some emphasis there. Our partner organization will also be having a webinar soon in the coming week or so, and they will bring in a lot of interesting ways of sort of action-oriented frameworks, and bringing in global experts who will be coming in talking to you about how they did it in their organizations, and how they created the framework, what their experiences have been, and what the challenges have been. So it is really listening to the experts, having candid conversations with them. It is very, the discussions that we'll have will be very, very action oriented. We'll be talking about how companies and leaders can set their goals, and how they can sort of implement this within their organizations. And of course, cannot stress enough that it is very important for the boards to lead the sustainability agenda. I myself, I have been sitting on various boards since last 14 years, and I have seen the transition. I have seen the change from hard to abate sectors. Even now, they are becoming very, very conscious. The regulators are becoming conscious. The investors are becoming conscious. So it's very interesting to sort of have the whole view of what the discussions were about a decade ago and what is front and center in the discussions now. So I invite you to any questions or any thoughts that you would like to hear from you, and I hope to respond to that. And while this conversation just doesn't end here, we'll be having many more. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Sure. So I wonder how we're going to manage this. Is it going to be through raise of hands, or is it going to be through the chat function?
I think raising hands would be a good option.
Yes.
I believe there are no questions.
We see a bunch of thank yous, and thank you for your time and sharing the space with us. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, in our future events. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.